Advances in the medical arena, greater awareness about health and a rapidly aging society are fueling calls for fresh debate over the definition of old age. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of Press Perspective for February 7th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. So, how old is old? Now that is the question up for debate here in Korea and apparently beyond borders as well. For more on this, I have writer Colin Marshall here in the studio with us. Colin, as always, welcome back.
Thank you, Sunhee.
I also have Thomas Maresca with news agency UPI here in the studio with us. Thomas, it's good to have you here.
Thanks, great to be here.
Colin, we will start with you. What are your thoughts regarding efforts here to redefine old age?
It's funny this should come up right now because I was recently at the health center in my neighborhood and I saw a sign on a door where they do vaccinations saying they were currently vaccinating for some pneumonia-related inoculation, currently vaccinating 60년생 어르신.
Which is those in their 60s.
Yeah, well, 60년생, so born in 1960. And I was thinking, someone born in 1960, part of me always thinks, aren't they about 38? You know, like you don't update, but of course they're 65 now. And 65 has long been, I think for more than 40 years, the official point where you get into old age in Korea, officially defined old age, 65 years old. And if we think of 65-year-olds, we may know it seems a little bit ridiculous at this point because people aren't doing the sort of back-breaking work they once did, and health habits are better. Medical care is better, especially in Korea where it's now at a very high level. So life expectancy is longer, and there's not really a clear reason for somebody to be expected to enter this sort of old age phase of life at age 65. I mean, even retirement for a lot of people is unrealistic for a variety of reasons we'll get into at age 65. But this question has been coming up for years in the news, this idea of like, should we change the retirement age? Should we change the definition of old age? And these stock characters of Korean society make me think about this, like the cab drivers or the chicken shop owners or the apartment building guards who used to be like Samsung engineers, and they had to retire at 60. That day came, and either they didn't want to stop working or they couldn't stop working, and so they have to go into one of these secondary careers that are, to say the least, not as high status as what they were doing. That tells you a lot about the society. I mean, so do the much older people carting around wagons full of cardboard, but that's a whole different story. So yes, the ideas about old age seem to be, we've reached a point where circumstances have forced a change in thinking, a reconsideration.
Right, for sure. And before we delve further into the situation here in the Korean society, Thomas, I believe debate over redefining old age has been taking place beyond borders as well. I mean, given our approach, given its impact on our approach to work and retirement, as our Colin mentioned. What more can you add, Thomas?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think like many things, Korea is rushing at high speed into this next kind of demographic or major social change, but this has been going on in a lot of countries. I mean, I think Japan is probably the model where it's, Japan became a super aged society where I think more than 20% of the population is over 65 back in 2006, I believe. But a lot of the oldest countries in the world are actually in Europe now, Germany, Italy, Greece, Sweden, countries like that. So these countries have been addressing this topic for a while, and a lot of them have already made some of these changes that are being discussed here. I mean, retirement age has risen in a lot of these countries. In Greece, Australia, Denmark, it's already 67. Germany, it's on its way to 67. Even in the US, I think it's gone to 66 now, and it's stepping up to 67. So, the age at which you would receive kind of the full benefits of which you're entitled to. But, these countries also are looking at ways to kind of address and integrate these aging silver kind of populations. One example that I covered was in Singapore, and Japan has a similar program called re-employment, where it's not just, there's like a retirement age, which was, I think, 63 at the time in Singapore. Now that's also going up. But then there's a re-employment age, which is like 68, and it means you can retire at the earlier age, but if you want to keep working, the company basically has to allow you to work, but there are, the government will sort of help subsidize, and they might change your load and kind of accommodate whatever your needs are. But it's a sort of a social program that looks to gain value from the workforce, as Colin mentioned. At 65, you're not suddenly kind of like a useless figure, and people are healthier as they get older, and the types of work a lot of people are doing, not all people, of course, are doing, can continue on. So, this is just a question that Korea has to, all of these countries that are aging will have to sort of work on, what just for the, the value that older people still offer, as well as, for the people themselves. I mean, the societal structure has changed so much where it's not, families are smaller. A lot of older people might be living alone or might have one child. It's not a huge brood of grandchildren anymore. So, people also want to just kind of remain integrated in society. So, this kind of goes along with this idea of a changing concept of what aging even is and what these different stages are. So yes, it's certainly not just in Korea. I mean, there are lessons probably that can be drawn from some countries like a Japan or a Singapore, or some things in Europe that Korea could also look to as it navigates the challenge.
Right. Generally speaking, Colin, what factors do you suppose should be considered when seeking to, of course, redefine old age?
Well, the major one here in Korea is one that people will have heard about ad nauseum if they follow the Korean news, which is the low birth rate, which leads to, as Thomas mentioned, the super-aged society, a designation, I believe, applied by the United Nations. Not yet to Korea. I think Korea is approaching the super-aged society. That's scary sounding label. Korea is also, according to the OECD rankings, I believe Korea has the highest old age poverty level among OECD countries. So yet another instance of Korea coming up short in the OECD rankings, but it's included within the OECD. So by comparison to the world standard, it's not necessarily that bad, but still something to watch for. As well, something else Thomas alluded to, family structures are different. The structure of society is different. There aren't as many multi-generational households as there once were in Korea. So older people, their time is not occupied by watching over this household of 3-4 generations. They're not managing that. And I can understand, as anybody could understand, you don't want to be completely idle past a certain age. So the interest in working and the interest in organizations, or be they governmental or otherwise, to aid re-entry into the workforce has come up a lot in recent years. Even groups of senior citizens have been sort of voting or declaring for their own part that they don't want the age of old age, retirement age, whatever you're going to call it. They don't want that to be as low as it's been. They themselves see that age as being more like 70, 71. So that's a factor as well. But then you have to think about sort of, if you look at other countries like the United States, where I'm from, you have a lot of complaints that get aired publicly by my generation, the millennials, insisting that the baby boomers, our parents' generation, have refused to relinquish their social or economic or professional positions in society. So the baby boomers won't step down, so we can't get started. That's been the refrain. True or not, I mean, sure, there's a grain of truth to it, but I'm not sure it's the whole story. In any case, it's the kind of dynamic that would be best avoided, if possible, here in Korea, though I have read some articles putting forth the undesirable future possibility of, teenagers and senior citizens fighting over the same jobs at the loteria or whatever it might be. So we'll have to bear that in mind as well.
Right, and staying here in the country, Thomas, what are your thoughts with regard to factors to keep in mind as we seek to define old age again?
Right. Well, there are, obviously the practical question that relates to this idea of, raising the official retirement age is just kind of finances around the pension system. When you have such a top-heavy group receiving benefits and less people working to pay into that system. So, that's obviously a topic of discussion of how to potentially reform that. I mean, there's been debates about kind of means testing it or something, where, I mean, a bit alluding also to what Colin was saying, there is this idea that some of the generations that are retiring are, much better off than the younger generations that are paying into it. So, should they be receiving, say, the full amount of whatever kind of government pension or assistance they would be entitled to? So those are some questions about just the kind of dynamics of that. And I mean, I think more broadly speaking, it does touch these issues of just kind of social perceptions. I mean, discussions about what it means and what the role of, being an older person is in society today and what sort of interests and values you have. I mean, I'm seeing some of that happening certainly already in Korea. There was a group I met called the New Gray, and it was kind of a social media, fashion, advertising age. Maybe you've seen them, like a kind of a collective where it's these older gentlemen, I mean, really like good looking, handsome guys, but it's just kind of this idea of like styling them almost in the way like, Instagram influencers are styled. And so there's that sort of just changing the mentality around it. But of course, there are tons of practical considerations. I mean, just kind of making cities more kind of age-friendly, accessibility, transport. I mean, I can imagine Korea will be good at addressing things on the kind of tech end of that. I've also seen that kind of happening as well with just robotics and sort of tech-friendly approaches to medicine, maybe like telemedicine, things along those lines. So those are considerations. A huge one that Korea has often struggled with that some other countries are looking to kind of mitigate the effect of the aging society is immigration policies. And that's been migration has grown somewhat to Korea over the years, but it still is kind of not at the level that countries that have really kind of turned to that as a way to help address the aging solution. And that goes along that goes along some with the idea of kind of physical labor or the type of labor that older generations, even if they stay in the workforce, are not going to be well suited towards doing, like working in factories and things. So that's another question or discussion that Korea is going to have to address.
Right, and staying with what Thomas has just said, this is an impromptu question, Colin, but do you suppose that Korea could do a bit more perhaps to open its doors to like foreign residents, immigration, because some experts have pointed to that as one way to deal with our aging society and of course low birth rate? It's
true, as many a foreigner living in Korea will tell you, the visa system is too complicated. Not so much that it's too complicated, it's too difficult in a sort of arbitrary way. You can't quite, how to put it, getting a visa for you always have to get it for a certain job, and the qualifications are fairly strict, but you can't tell which ones are strictly adhered to and which are not. So it would be an improvement to, how to put it, to offer a more blanket visa system where you don't have to qualify for one specific job, but where, as a foreigner, you can be qualified broadly to work in Korea. That's something I feel like this country will probably need going forward, yes.
Right, of course, going forward. Right, let's move on to now some other stories, Thomas, that have made international headlines as well. Now, earlier this week, I believe, Thomas, you covered the partnership sealed between OpenAI and South Korea's Kakao. Do tell us a bit more about this particular deal and its broader significance.
Right. So, earlier this week, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was here in Korea, and he and Shin Ah, the CEO of Kakao, held a press event and announced that a partnership between OpenAI and Kakao, just basically to use OpenAI technology across Kakao's digital ecosystem, including they'll be launching a Kanana AI chatbot, it's going to be called, and that's going to use OpenAI technology. And they said they would work together in a kind of jointly develop AI projects. And this is coming on the heels. Sam Altman has been doing a kind of Asia tour this week. Actually, he was in Japan the day before and announced like a $3 billion deal with SoftBank, and he was in India the day after. So, this is all coming on the heels of the just kind of revolution in the industry that's just taking place within the last month by the introduction of DeepSeek, the Chinese startup that launched it was only January 20th that their R1 chatbot went live in app stores, and that's just completely thrown the entire industry kind of for a loop, just because it's considered to be just as good as OpenAI's top model in terms of this kind of reasoning type of AI use, but was created at much lower cost and requires much less computing power to operate. And that's just kind of shaken the foundations of what everyone was assuming would be the necessary components of AI going forward. So all of this, massive spend on infrastructure and chips, the stock market reacted very quickly with NVIDIA losing something like $600 million, NVIDIA, the chip maker. And I think, so now there's this sense of wondering how is this going to kind of shake out in the future. And that affects Korea as well. I mean, obviously, and Sam Altman met with SK Group CEO, Samsung CEO, just because they're big major memory chip players, and SK Hynix is a big supplier to NVIDIA. So right now there's a lot of just trying to sort out what this is going to mean going forward. I would say specifically as well with the OpenAI Kakao partnership and as well with SoftBank, this is also an opportunity for OpenAI to train its models on Asian languages. I think that's a big important piece of this. And you've got DeepSeek coming from an Asian country as well. So we're going to see just, no matter what happens, obviously AI is going to continue to grow dramatically, but we'll see these kind of partnerships and we'll see it spread more out of this kind of English language bubble that it's still in the future.
Right, and against this backdrop, Colin, what look to be the social implications of such technological advances, do you think?
I follow a fair few people who are AI early adopters, shall we say, on social media. And there's been a refrain from them over the past 2 or 3 years almost now. They keep saying, we have artificial intelligence, we have computers that can think, we have this technology that would have seemed miraculous a few years ago, and no one cares. Why isn't anybody doing anything differently? Why aren't people reacting to this? Why isn't the general public reacting? So they're wondering why the social effects have not manifested. Because they're using, we all know sort of ChatGPT, OpenAI's flagship product, the free version, which is impressive enough. But according to these people, it's like you pay the $200 US for the more advanced model, and that really is life-changing. They say that'll change not just your life, but like human life in general. That's what's coming. And so I think we won't see serious social effects for a while. But to build upon what Thomas was saying, what fascinates me is you have something different, not just the way that AI has developed, but you have something different in that you have this push for culturally specific artificial intelligence. OpenAI is getting something out of this. If they can, it's machine learning. You have to train your machines on a base of information. And if you have access to the messaging app pretty much all Koreans use, you're going to have a lot of information to work with in that language. But I think it's been an article of faith in Silicon Valley that technology is culturally neutral. But here we have an example of not exactly a contradiction. I think there's a core of that that's true, but even culturally neutral technologies, they can develop in culturally specific ways. So it's like there could be a Chinese AI. Is DeepSeek Chinese or not? Does it make sense to call it Chinese? Maybe, maybe not. But if an AI is being trained on Korean data for Korean use, you can call that a Korean AI. And so this idea that, there really are technologies, there can be technologies that are geared toward a culture, a specific culture, a specific society, is something worth keeping an eye on because it contradicts a lot of where technology has been going for the past 30, 40, 50 years.
Right, that is something to think about. Moving forward, Thomas, a rather entertaining article by the Wall Street Journal has linked the secret to longer marriages here in South Korea to the soaring numbers of TV shows on divorce. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, yes. The article basically is, I don't know if it's causation, but it's certainly correlation. The article is arguing that, the proliferation of divorce-themed shows, which, I've certainly noticed over the past few years, you probably have as well, just from both reality-type series, some of them are kind of like celebrity divorces, to more like to date. Now there's dating shows, divorced singles, or life after divorce, and there's also kind of more self-help or like therapeutic type of shows about helping people to work on their problems and navigate divorce issues as well. And there's even dramas. There was one, The Good Partner, on Netflix, which is extremely popular, about a divorce lawyer. So the article is kind of tying that into the fact that divorce rates, which have been historically fairly high in Korea, have been declining over the past few years, and people that are being represented in the article are talking about some of the reasons they like these divorce shows and how it helps them understand maybe problems in their own marriage, or they can compare themselves to what they're seeing on TV and saying, oh, my marriage is not as bad as that. And it's all taken under the kind of umbrella of the idea that divorce, it's not necessarily taboo in Korea, but it's certainly not kind of maybe openly discussed as much. So this is a way for people to kind of find some common ground and maybe understand, and for the culture to sort of express and work on that. But I would say that I'm not so sure that that's really a direct one-to-one connection. I mean, at the same time, marriages have gone down dramatically in Korea over the years, and just even generally around the world, both marriages and divorces went down during the COVID pandemic, which is also kind of covering this time period. Yeah, I mean, there's something of note to it, the fact that why are these shows so popular here in the first place? And I do think it does speak to this idea of Korea and culture changing, and some of the more traditional kind of ideas about just relationships and marriage and what constitutes, the proper way to live, are being, relooked at, addressed, and kind of, cycled through the culture and seeing what comes out of it.
Right. And the same article, Colin, it says despite the higher number of divorces here in Korea compared to the past, stigma surrounding this particular marital status remains more or less strong here. What have been some of your observations?
I was watching this show a few months ago with my wife, and it was a kind of a reality show where they were matchmaking. They set up this young lady and a young man, and it builds up to the lady making this confession to the man, and she's been avoiding it, and she eventually says, "I've got to tell you something. I'm dolshing." And when I was watching, I was like, okay, dolshing. I didn't know what it meant. And so I gathered, it meant she's divorced. She's dolshing. She's returned to singlehood. And the show presented it as, yes, on one side, it was this big confession, and his reaction wasn't, you could tell he wasn't thrilled about it, but he was more like bewildered as to, okay, well then how do I handle this? At the same time, there is this word dolshing in the culture. Like there's a label for it now, something you can be. You're not a divorcee, you are, but you're back to singlehood. It's something even if it's not positive, it's not negative. So that perception has changed a bit. But I think now at this moment, it's like when I first came to Korea, there was this, you'd watch TV, another TV example, a rapper would go on TV, for example, and they would always have their arms covered with these bandages, these flesh-colored bandages, because they had tattoos. And so they just covered the tattoos in a very sort of obvious-looking way. And so I was always thinking, okay, Korea, either have a society where you don't have tattoos or don't pretend you do have that society, like one or the other. But that's loosened up a bit over the past 10 years that I've been here. And I think this idea about divorce not getting mentioned obviously has loosened up a lot, because there are reality shows just about divorce. So, I mean, I don't think you could say this is a terrible thing, although then again, if you point to a country like the US, where attitudes about divorce have long since liberalized, I mean, US marriage culture is not to be imitated necessarily, but I think a lot of this is like, you can see Korea going from a communitarian society to an institutional society, shall we say. Marriage is not perceived as being totally necessary to embed yourself in a community and in local social life. So that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but it's more sort of a general civilizational trend. So it's not only Korea's issue, but it's one that manifests here clearly and sometimes entertainingly, shall we say.
Right, entertainingly, I'll take that. All right, Colin, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Thomas, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have today. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.